men as a group are working together to oppress women as a group, as a whole. Is that what the patriarchy is?
And the earth.
And the earth.
Yes. And so if we think of like, fracking, for instance, that's a product of the patriarchy.
Fracking is a product of the patriarchy.
Absolutely. Like extracting resources
what else is a product of the patriarchy?
Plastic surgery.
Plastic surgery,
big product
is
of the patriarchy.
Is a product of the patriarchy.
Yes, because feminine beauty standards that say like only a woman who looks like this is a woman that will be loved, that will receive love from a man usually. So we have this whole industry around plastic surgery that's going to like create, and if anyone gets plastic surgery, like it's not saying like don't do that or never do that, whatever. But I'd say that's a product of the patriarchy. I would say that razors are a product of the patriarchy. Like it's so many things.
Razors?
Yes. The concept of eating disorders, product of the patriarchy.
Wait, razors are how did razors get involved? Shaving? Yes. What? Shaving is a product of the patriarchy?
Yes. Actually, I have resources on this if we want to go back to the witch burning times.
The witch burnings?
Yes.
What happened then?
What happened then?
What happened with the witches?
Men and women. So it's really never about just men or women. It's like the masculine within all of us, right? And so men and women both were shut down for being in attunement with nature, being in attunement with the elements, for knowing about herbal medicine, for birthing babies, midwives, etc. And so in the book, Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, they talk about how those who would be called witches would, before they'd be burned at the stake or sunk into water, they would strip them of their power in many ways. One of those ways being shaving their legs to strip them of the power of their hair, which often symbolizes the intuition.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
We touched on a lot of things. Okay. So I'm still not totally sure what the patriarchy is. Does anybody else want to jump in or take a crack at it?
I would say that a lot of things mentioned, and this is just my personal opinion, is more of a factor of capitalism than it is of like, oh, you want to look like this. But at the same time, like I've had plastic surgery. So
what kind of plastic surgery?
Like I had a nose job 2 years ago. And honestly, I was with a guy and he dated me through the whole thing before and after. So I don't know. I think it's more of like a personal thing.
You mean the plastic surgery thing?
Yeah, I think it's more of a personal thing.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of like this patriarchy, there is also this like femme fatale that's kind of emerged. Like I also feel like I'm in control of some of the situations when I'm with a guy. And there's also been times where I'm in the room with a guy and I know and he knows that there are some advantages that I have. Maybe it's like whatever the social advantages are, like job, like whatever it is, like there's a clear air in the room that I have the advantage in that situation. That man is trying to impress me, and I don't know, I think there's something to that. It's like, okay,
so you're saying in a social setting
sometimes
you have some advantages over men when you're moving through a room,
or maybe I feel that way.
Okay.
Like it's almost like the image of like a girl walking and like guys are like fanning her down. It's just like there are some, I don't know. I feel like women do have a lot of advantages over men in the sense that they are so just like, I don't know, careless and just, I don't know. It's such a weird concept, but I definitely feel like a guy, like some guys will just do anything.
The goddess.
Yeah. They'll do
answer.
Wow. Okay. So we could probably definitely go down the rabbit hole of patriarchy and feminism and all that stuff. I don't know how much we want to veer in that direction. I mean, I don't know, this whole idea of a patriarchy, honestly, this is gonna be a hot take. It's basically just QAnon and deep state for feminists. That's my take. I mean, this idea of a patriarchy, it's also just the apex fallacy. You're looking at the men at the very top, but like not considering men. I mean, you can say that you mentioned like politicians and stuff. Certainly in certain positions of power and like CEO jobs and stuff, yes, there is a higher proportion of men, but there is a higher proportion of men that also occupy the absolute worst positions, the absolute worst jobs. 80% of the homeless are men. The vast majority of people who commit suicide are men. The most amount of people who are in prison are men. Police brutality, police killings, it impacts men most. So, I mean, I think both men and women have their advantages and disadvantages, their struggles. So.
I fully agree. And everything I shared isn't to say that that's not true. It's the concept of, it's the domination paradigm and masculine and feminine energy, like yin and yang, rather than just men and women. Like, everything I stand for is the opposite of like that polarization that feminism can get into. It's like, how do we ultimately come back together and understand that the patriarchy affects men just as much as women, and capitalism and the patriarchy are like so intertwined. And white supremacy, it's all like part of the same interlocking systems of oppression.
Word. Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe another hot take, but I think that if you really look back throughout history, certainly there were ways in which women were disadvantaged in ways men weren't. I think the big one we can all think about is the right to vote, right? Mm-hmm. For a while there, women did not have the right to vote. And I think women certainly should have the right to vote. But I think what you also have to look at is the broader context of history. And it actually wasn't, so for example, with the right to vote, it actually wasn't that long before women got the right to vote that just men, broadly speaking, they couldn't vote either. At least, I mean, it breaks down different countries and stuff, but in the US, you had to be a property owner. And then also, one of the things that's often overlooked in this discussion is the draft. So would you guys agree that rights come with responsibilities, or they should come with responsibilities? So one of the reasons men had the right to vote is because they were subject to the draft. And to this day, men are still subject to the draft. And you can say, well, there's probably not going to be another draft. But I mean, if you've seen what's going on in the world, I don't think things are looking great. So it's certainly plausible within the next 10 or 20 years, there certainly could be a draft in the US. And I mean, certainly in Ukraine, actually they prevented men from leaving Ukraine. If you were a man between 18 and 64, you had to stay, join the army, fight, and die here in 2022. So I think bringing it back to women's voting, women's suffrage, there was, do any of you know what year it was? 1920, I believe, that it was ratified.
Was it 1920, 1931?
It was 1920, 1920. So does anyone know what happened just before, like in that a few years before 1920? Big event.
Dates, no.
Okay, it was World War I, 1914 to 1918.
Well, yeah, but okay, so.
So I'm this is a bit, I'll wrap it all together. Yeah. But, so those men were allowed to vote, but they also were subject to the draft. And I think in total, I don't know what the US count is for World War I, probably a couple 100,000 in World War I. US men died. I think the total number, it was like 20, 30 million, maybe 20 million military casualties for World War I. And probably 99.99% of those were men. So as a man still today in 2022, for us to have the right to vote, we are subject to the draft. We have to register for the selective service. If we don't, it's actually felony in the US as a man to not be registered with selective service. So I mean,
can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, you're saying, men are subject to the draft. It's a requirement. If they're drafted, they didn't get the right to vote. It was only like property owners, whatever. But who created that society? It wasn't women. Men created that society for themselves. You know what I mean? Well,
it was men, but just because it was men, I don't think their gender is necessarily related to the decisions that they made. In the same way that the Supreme Court that well, it's no longer the case, but that gave us Roe v. Wade, my understanding is it was 9 men who gave us the ruling in Roe v. Wade.
What does What does that mean? Like the men give the women permission
Like,
to
oh, thanks.
choose about our own bodies?
About
Well,
their own
and it
body.
was also, broadly speaking, I think at the time in the years leading up to 1920, it was mostly men who were in the government. And so if there was a patriarchy, I would challenge you and say that if the patriarchy is men in this cabal, this conspiracy to oppress women, then why would they have enabled women or given women the right to vote?
I do not think the patriarchy is like men trying to suppress women. It's not that like gender based.
Uh-huh.
It's this energy that serves no one. Like this concept of the patriarchy, this arbitrary word, it doesn't serve any of us.
It's a gendered
It is a
term.
gendered term. It is a gendered term.
Patri,
yes,
father.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's another word that we get to use, and you mentioned capitalism, and it's all part of it.
I think that was Samantha.
Yeah.
She's a raging communist. She's a raging communist. Oh, you missed her laugh, Eric.